Okay, so the next section is basically just all the converses of what we just did in the last section. So in 6.2, you were told that a figure was a parallelogram, and therefore you had to assume that the certain properties were true. This is going to be the converse saying, given that this property is true, you can then figure out that something is a parallelogram. Okay, so for each of these, it's going to seem very similar to what you just did, except the only difference is it's the converse of the statement. So in the last section, I told you if something's a parallelogram, then opposite pairs of sides are congruent. Here I'm telling you in this section, you can prove that something is a parallelogram by showing that its opposite sides are congruent. Okay, so that's your first theorem here, and just fair warning, there are 5, so you're going to have to add 1 box on the end of your paper, so if you want to stop the video right now and do that, you can do so. Okay, so if the opposite sides are congruent, we can assume that a figure is a parallelogram. Again, the same thing. In the last section, you were told if something is a parallelogram, then we can assume the opposite angles are congruent. So in this theorem, we're saying if opposite angles are congruent in a figure, we can then assume that that figure is a parallelogram. Same thing is true for the supplementary angles. If consecutive angles are supplementary, then we can assume that the figure is a parallelogram. Again, same thing with our diagonals. If the diagonals bisect each other in a figure, we can assume that that figure is also a parallelogram. Okay? And this is really just the definition. Okay, so if you want to rewrite this as a biconditional statement, you can do that. If you want to just add it to the bottom of your paper, that's fine. And all this is saying is if one pair of opposite sides that are parallel to each other are congruent, then you can also assume that the figure is a parallelogram. Okay? And this is a summary of all of those bullets, which if you'd like to, you can turn over the back of your paper and copy these down there. Okay, and that's all. So again, it all seems very similar to what you did in the last section. The only difference is the information you're given and the information you can then assume from that. Okay?